All right. So we're going to build our full stack Taskmanager application. So we'll start by creating our Nextjs project or Nextjs app, and we'll use npx to do so. And we'll add latest, and I'm going to name it my app. Feel free to name yours whatever you like. So in this project, we will not be using TypeScript. We'll say yes to ESLint, yes to Tailwind, no to the SRC, yes to the app router, no to import alias, and we'll give this a few minutes to finish installation. Another moment or two here. Now we'll install a few dependencies. We're going to need mongoose. We'll start with the back end. We'll use Mongodb. We're going to need Nextjs13. We're going to use the auth adapter, and we'll talk more about it as we set this up. But this is so that we can save our backend user information into MongoDB. There's an adapter through Nextjs to do so. And with that, we'll go ahead and we'll need more for our front end, but this should conclude our backend dependencies. But if we need more, we can always add it. Oh, I didn't see the into the directory. Sorry about that. Let me fix that once this is done. So go ahead. I'm going to delete this package.json. So these node modules here, this should have been in the app. So let's clear this and let's cd into the directory. And did it save it? Yes. Now that we're into the directory, now let's install these dependencies. And we'll give it a few minutes to finish up. Okay, and we're not going to do much on our front end for right now, but I do want to just do some simple cleanup. So we'll go into the app, and this is just optional. I like to remove the boiler CSS and set the overflow and the X to hidden. And we'll go into the layout, and I'll keep the custom font for now. We may change it. And we'll go into our page.js, and let's remove the boiler code within it. And we'll just type in home page just to have something there on the screen. So let's just test it just to make sure there isn't any issues, but it should be fine. And We'll go back into my app and we'll go npm run dev. And we'll give it a few minutes to load up. And we'll go to localhost. I think this is 3000, yeah. Okay, see we have our home page. So let's start by connecting to our database first. And let's create a file name .env. Well, first, before we create it, let's go into our getignore and let's add our .env file to our getignore files. This is just to make sure that this file is not included in our Git repo as we upload our information to Git. And then let's create a file named .env. This is where we store our MongoDB connection string that we'll set up in just a moment. But first, let's add a directory or a folder named lib. And within it, let's add a file named db.js. And I'm going to just paste this information in. This is just a connection to Mongo, the function that utilizes the function that acts as a connection to MongoDB. This is just boiler code that you can type in just for the connection. I'm not going to type it out and risk the error, but feel free to copy it. And I'll also have the Git repo in the description as well once we're finished. So no worries there. So we will need this .env variable, which is mongo_URL. This will be the database connect. This will hold the database connection string that we're going to set up in just a moment. So we'll go ahead and add it to our .env file. And if we go to MongoDB, and log into our account, in just a few seconds. And let's see, I'm just going to go to one of these. I have a few clusters already going, but we'll shut the cluster down and create a new one. So we'll terminate this one. And give it a few minutes to shut down. And we'll just go to our projects, delete the one that we just, the session that we just terminated. We'll delete this project, create a new one, and we'll use that as our connection string. Why is it not letting me? Well, let's try to delete this one too. It may reduce the amount to just 2. That's fine. Let's delete this one as well. Okay. Give it a few more minutes. And let's go to view all projects and we'll delete it. Let's go to new project And we'll name this one task, my task manager. Okay, and we'll just keep the same project owner. And we'll go to create a database. And I'm going to use the free tier. And I have the region closest to me. And we'll just go to create. And I'm going to just use the generated password. And I'll put it here to remember it. And we'll go to create user. And let's just click finish. And we now have our cluster set up. So I'm going to use the connection string provided by MongoDB that's listed here. And we'll copy this to our mongo_URL. This really should be URI, but URL is fine. And I'm going to grab the password created. And we'll delete this and save the file. And that should care for our initial connection to MongoDB. And we have our connection string here as well. So now that we have those two things in place, let's go ahead and create the models for our application. So we'll create a new directory named models, and within it, the first model we'll need is a user model. And this is just so that we can store our users in the database. So we'll start by importing mongoose from mongoose. And the first schema will be named a user. It'll be a user schema, User schema is equal to new mongoose. Dot schema. And we don't need to store much within this. If I spell it right, it won't give me an error. There we go. We don't need to store much for our users. I'm just going to grab the email and we'll say type of string. And we'll say that it's required to true. And we'll say unique true as well. And this is just a personal task manager, so feel free to customize it any way you want. You could assign tasks if you want to have multiple users log in, but just want to store the users that we create. And we'll grab the timestamp as well. We'll set that to true. And let's make sure that we export this so that it could be used throughout our application. And we'll say mongoose.models.user or mongoose.model user MODEL. And this should be mongoose. Sorry, having a tough time typing this morning, looks like. And this will be user schema. Okay, so if we save, that should care for the storage of our users in our database. Next, let's set up the actual task within the models. And these are the tasks that we will use to create and add and edit and display the tasks that we need to get done throughout the day. So we'll go import mongoose from mongoose. And we're going to name this one just regular task schema. That's the task schema is equal to new mongoose.schema. And we'll say these have a title. And we'll set it to as a type of string. We'll say required true. Okay, and next we want to have a description. So we'll say disk type of string required true. Okay. Yeah, we don't need this. Come here, let's put it here. And we'll set the status, and this will be so that we can see what the status of each task is. And we'll make the type string, required true. And these will be select option drop down. So we'll provide the options so that for organization purposes, so that we don't just have a lot of different statuses listed. So the first one will be open. Then we'll have one for closed. And we'll have one for progress. And we'll want to grab the timestamp as well. Let's set it to true. And let's be sure that we export it. Export default mongoose dot models dot task, or mongoose dot model task, and this will be task schema. Okay, and let's give this a once over. Everything looks pretty good. Okay, so with our models cared for, let's go ahead and set up our APIs. And our APIs are going to be, it's going to allow us to interact with, our database from, and this will be, we'll also have the ability to utilize we're going to set up a front end with our application as well. So we'll go ahead and create the models. The first model we'll we'll set up the API. So and because we're using the app router within the app directory, let's create a folder named API. And all of our backend requests will be within this folder. So the first model the first API that we want to set up is for our task. So I'll add a directory named task, and within it we'll add a file named route.js. Now within the API directory, let's add another directory. This one will be stats. And this is just going to show a quick overview of the amount of users we have, the amount of tasks in total we have, and the status of each. So inside of stats, let's add a file named route.js. And then the last API directory we'll set up will be for authentication. This is totally optional, but I just want to add some Google OAuth or authentication so that we can restrict access to our task. So within API, we're going to add a directory named auth. And within auth, let's add another directory name, or with the name of bracket, open bracket, 3 dots, next, auth, close bracket. And then within it, let's add a file named route.js. So within this file, and we'll set the first route within this file. This will be the first one that we build. Within this will be our connection to Nextjs that's going to allow authentication, and we're going to use the Google OAuth to set up our authentication. So before we set up Google, let's just go ahead and add in a few dependencies here. First, we'll import Nextjs. And with this setup, we'll want to go ahead and do a few more things to get our application up and going. So first, let's start by setting up our Google client provider. So I went ahead and logged into my account and began the process of setting up a OAuth consent screen. So I'm going to do a external screen, and I'm going to name this application task. and we'll use the email that's listed here. And we don't need to have any of the information listed there. Okay. And add and remove scopes. No, we're not going to grab any additional information from that. And let's just go ahead and click save. Go back to the dashboard and let's set up our credentials. Create credentials. There we go. It's been a while for this one. This is a web application, web 1. So within our origins, let's add in http:// localhost. Localhost, yep. And then here we'll add in localhost, and let's add in 3000. And we'll put http://localhost 3000 /API/auth callback /Google. And we'll verify this once we set up the Google authentication through Nextjs. And for this one, it should be just localhost. So let's just grab this. And let's just save our screen, and you should have your client ID and your secret. Now, look, don't copy my client ID. Just follow the steps and set up your own. It's free. And I'll take this down eventually, but that's how you set it up. So now let's go to Nextjs, and let's grab what we need to set up Google, and go to Nextjs. Yep, right here, localhost auth callback Google. That's not it. This is it right here. Let's just make sure that's what we keyed in. I tell you what, let's just copy it to be sure, because sometimes I will just do this. Go. Save. All right. And we're going to use Google as our provider. So within this file, let's type in const handler is equal to Nextjs. And we can just go back to providers, copy it here, and we're going to store this information in our .env file. And let's grab the secret as well. And we'll go back to our credentials. Here's our client ID. And the secret is within here. Grab our secret here. Okay. And let's close this file out. Okay. So that cares for the providers. Now I want to use the adapter as well. That way it'll save to MongoDB. So, we'll need to bring in the provider right here. And let's go to the adapter, and we'll need to set up the client promise. So let's copy this. Let's go to lib, and let's create a directory within lib that's going to store this information. So we'll call it client promise just to keep it consistent. .js, excuse me. And we're not using TypeScript, so we can remove this, but everything else pretty much remains the same. More boiler code the same way with our database connection. So let's just close it out. Make sure we save this file. So this is saying Mongo, and this is where just need to double check. So remember, we named ours URL, not URI, so we can just change it there, and we'll change it there. And save. Let's just make sure I didn't miss anything. DB underscore URI right there. Let's change that to a L, right? Mongodb underscore URL. Yeah. Okay. So with that, we can close this out and go back to Nextjs. And let's import the client promise, because we're going to need that according to the documentation. So let's import client promise, and the adapter is used here, so we can actually add it here. And let's see, do we need anything else? We have this. We'll need the adapter itself. And we'll save that. So with these items cared for, now we can move on to setting up the connection, setting up the button that so that we can have the login with Google OAuth. So let's go ahead and create a place to store it. So we're going to add a directory named components. And within components, let's add a file named Navbar. And within this is going to control our logging in and logging out for the application. Instead of setting this up to be server-side authentication, we're just going to keep it simple. Since it's just a simple personal application, we'll set our authentication up to be on the client side. So before we do this, we'll need to wrap our application in the session. So let's go ahead and add a file named session provider.js. And within the session provider, it's just going to wrap the application with the session, and that information should be, let's see, we'll go to get started. Yep, right here. So we can just copy this information and paste it here. Make sure this looks good. We're not making any changes. I think we're just going to keep it pretty simple. Instead of having component props, let's change this to children. And right here, we'll change this from, I'll tell you what, let's just, we're going to write this different because this is really for TypeScript. So first we'll need, we can keep the session provider. We'll need to set this as a client side app. So use client. Then let's go const provider is equal to, and we're going to pass in the children as a prop and the session. That way it can be used throughout the application. Nope, this should be a parentheses. And within this, let's just add session provider. And we're going to go with session. And within this, we'll go children. And don't forget to export it. And we'll call this provider. Make sure I didn't misspell anything. Okay, that looks good. Now we'll need to wrap our layout with the new provider, so we can remove it momentarily. Clean this up a little bit. Provider. And then let's store the children. And if we save this, that should take care of it. Now let's go back and let's add in the authentication just to make sure that it works. So now let's go back to our Navbar, and this is going to be a client-side component, obviously. And we'll need to bring in a few items. So we'll start with the RFC template, and importing React is fine. Let's bring in use session. We want to use sign in, and this is going to come from Nextjs, and we want to use sign out, and this is from Next excuse me, from Next-auth/React. And we're going to need link, because this is going to link us to one other page within our application. And within the Navbar component, we're going to need to grab the data from the Nextjs session object. And this is basically just destructuring it so that we can grab some information within that session. And then within the return statement, let's just update the tags to header. And I'll worry about styling this in just a moment. For right now, I just want to make sure that the session is working. So we'll put a div here, and we'll put link. We'll call this well, it needs an href. We'll call it, to go back to home, we'll call it Taskmanager. And inside of the div, excuse me, let's add another div. This is going to hold a couple of links in our session. So we'll start by saying session. Sorry about that. And we'll need, if there's a session, let's add in we want to see the user that's signed in. So we'll go session.user.email. And we also want the ability to go to the task page. And we haven't created it just yet, and that's okay. We'll create it later. And that is going to show task, and this will indicate, or this is assuming that the user is logged in. So let's add a button, and we'll set the onClick method to sign out. Here we're going to use that from Nextjs. And we'll need to call it, and outside of this, let's just add in the word sign out. And right here, if we are not logged in or we don't have a session, what we should see is a button to sign in. So let's add button, we'll go sign in, and right here we'll add the onClick handler, and we'll go with sign in. Okay, let's save this file. Mongodb URL. I see we're getting an error here. Let's see what we have. Mongodb. I bet it's not named Mongodb. That's fine. Let's just name this MongoDB. Save it. Let's go to our database here and let's just add in DB. MongoDB there. I don't think we need it anywhere else, but let's just be sure. Mongoose, yep. Mongoose. Yep. That's fine. Okay, that should take care of everything. So let's take a look at our app. Well, we'll need to add it to our layout so that it is consistent throughout the page. So underneath provider, just type in open or the less than sign, a capital N for nav. And as you begin to type in Navbar, you should be able to import it from components and add in the closing tag. If we go back to our local host, we see that we have Taskmanager and sign in. If we click on sign in, it's saying that the page is not working right now. So let's see why we're getting this error. API off. No handlers. Duh. Sounds like I didn't export it. Sorry about that. So right here, you'll need to export the get and post handlers in order for this to work. My apologies for leaving it out, but it's pretty simple. So you just type in export handler, and we want as get, and we want handler as post. Now let's try this again. Let's go back, refresh, sign in with Google. And I'm gonna do, of course, with the JADAD, and boom, we see we're signed in. So we have our Google authentication set up. So we are fully signed in into the app. And let's see. Now with this, we can style our Navbar a little bit. So I'm going to use Daisy UI. Oh, we need to add the next auth secret as well. Let's do that. Where is it? I believe it's just next auth underscore secret. I know it's in here somewhere. Let's just do this one because we're going to need this one as well. Let's go with, and we'll make this http://localhost 3000, and we'll go next auth underscore secret, and just type in anything, save it. All right, we're good to go. No warning there. Perfect. And close out our .env file. So now let's style the Navbar just a little bit. We're not going to do much right now because we still need to finish setting up our backend. But if you're like me, it'll kind of kill you to see it with no style. So within the header, and this is optional, nothing really relevant to the functionality of the site, I like to add some padding on the X, a little bit of padding on the Y. Let's save it. And I'll tell you what, let's make this so that we can see it on both screens. And it's a little easier to view. We can see what we're making at the same time. So I'm going to set this up here, and I'll come back here. Okay, and we have our padding on the X and the Y. Oh, I just hit it right there. So within this div, this will hold our nav link and the links to sign in and sign out. So we'll give it a class name. We'll call it flex, justify, JUSTFY, y between. We'll set the max width to screen. Let's go XL. And we'll say MX auto. That way the screen is centered. If we save it, we see we have an adjustment, and if we maximize the screen, we see that we have the Taskmanager logo or link to the home page listed here, and on the right we have the user that's signed in, task, and to sign out. So now let's style this a little bit. So within this div, let's add a class name of flex, and this should put the items side by side. Yep. And within this p tag, let's add a class name of margin right 4, and within this button we're going to do the same. And don't forget about the link listed here. Actually, we really didn't need to put it on the button now that I realize, because that's just taking it off the end of the page. So let's just remove this one since it's by itself. And as you can see, we now have a little bit of margin on the right to each of the links so they're not bunched up together. And that cares for it. So now let's go back to our APIs and let's finish setting up the rest of them. So we're good with the authentication portion, and remember, we're going to use client-side authentication in this app, so we're not going to add any extra functionality to the login or authentication API. So within this file, this is going to hold our task. So we want the ability to, of course, all CRUD ability. So we want the ability to create, read, update, and delete our task. So within this file, the route.js, this is going to be the API endpoint of API/task. So let's start by importing the database connection. And let's also import the task model. And let's just make sure that our adapter and our connection is working properly. So before we finish this out, I'm sorry, let's go back to our MongoDB connection. And if we go to database, browse collections, we'll see, yep, we see our user that we just signed in with, excuse me. And we also have the session being stored as well, which is great. Now, we're going to make this a personal task manager, but you also have the ability to add in additional users, assign tasks to users, etc., and also provide roles. If that's something you're interested in, just let me know. I'll be happy to set that up as well. Otherwise, we'll just stick with what we have and keep this as a personal task manager versus one that is scalable to multiple users. So we'll minimize this screen, and back in our API task endpoint in the route.js, we brought in our database connection, we brought in the task model. The first request we want to make is a GET request. So we'll export async function, we'll say GET, and we'll put the request. And within this, we want to start with our connection to the database. So we'll go db.connect. And then we'll have a try catch block. And again, we're doing client-side authentication. Normally right here, you'll want to have some connection to send over your headers to make sure that you're having since we're not using, since we're using Nextjs, normally you would use the session to see if there's a session provider. But because we're using client-side, we're going to keep it simple. So right here, we'll create a variable named task. And we're going to say await, because we want to await that connection to the database. Task, which is grabbing the model task to see what do we have in our database. And we basically just want to go find. And within it, we want to return an empty object. This is going to allow all of the tasks to accumulate within this task variable. And then once we grab the task, we want to return it back to the browser, so we can do something with it. So we'll go return new response. and this will be JSON.stringify. And we want to pass in the variable task, which should be all tasks. And this, of course, will have a status of 201, which means everything went well. And within the catch portion, or the below, yes, within the catch portion for our error, if we get an error, let's return new response. And this will be JSON.stringify. And we'll pass in null just to keep it simple. And here we'll go status of 500. So this is going to care for the GET request. Now we'll need a way to, well, excuse me, this is going to care for the GET request, which will be to get all tasks out of the database. Next, we'll need a way to create tasks. So we'll go export async function post. And we'll go await db.connect. And we'll add a try catch block. And we'll start by adding a variable named new task, and we'll set it equal to await task dot create, and we want to create the body, and I need to grab the body first. Await rec.json. So this is going to grab the data from the body and convert it into JSON. Then once we grab it from the body, we want to store it in a variable named new task so that we can map it to our task model and save it within the database. If all goes well, we want to return new response, JSON.stringify new task. And we want to set the status to 201. And if we get an error, return new response, JSON.stringify null, and we'll set the status to 500. So if we want, we can actually test these now to see if it's working. So I'm going to use Thunder Client to keep it simple. This is just an extension from VS Code. You can use Postman or Insomnia. There's a few other you could actually create a quick little front end and test it if you wanted to as well. But I'm just going to keep it simple and keep it here. And let's see. Let's remove this. Let's just go with task and see what we get. We see that we get status code of 200, which means that the GET request is working. And if we go with the post request, let's go body. And I think we had a title. Let's go test. And the script. Let's go test the script. And status. Let's go with open. And you have to make sure the casing matches the casing in the model we created. And I'm pretty sure we kept all of the first letters capitalized and the other letters lowercase. Feel free to do it however you like, but just make sure you change this to a post request and make sure you set the API, or make sure you set the endpoint to API/task. And if we click send, boom, you see we get status code of 200 indicating that the task was created. And now let's go back to a GET request to make sure we get this task. And if we hit send, you see we get the update that the status is 201, and we see the task that we just created. So we see that that is working. Okay, so now that we have those two endpoints updated, let's add in 2 additional endpoints to delete and update a route. So let's go back to this folder, and within the task, because we would want to delete and update a task individually, we'll need to create a way to have our task identified uniquely. So I'm going to use a ID, and the way we'll do it with the app router is you'll do a bracket, ID, and then close bracket, and this tells Nextjs that we're looking for a ID after the API/task endpoint for an individual task. And within the ID directory, let's add a file named route.js. So this is going to represent a individual task, which is going to allow us to get it individually, delete it individually, and to update it. So let's start by importing our database. And then we'll also need our task model, the same way we did in our get, or same way we did, in our get and post endpoints. And let's create a way to get each task individually. So let's go export async, function. And this is going to be a get request. And we'll also need to pass in, so within the parentheses, this is going to be a request, but we'll also need to pass in CTX, which is going to represent that it's going to be a individual ID that we'll be passing in, or that we should be capturing. And within this function, we'll always start with our database connection, and we'll add a try catch block. And first, we'll need to grab the ID so that we can work with it. So we'll go const ID is equal to ctx.params.id. And then within the try catch block, we'll go const task is equal to await task dot find by ID. And once we find it, we want to return new response. And this will be json.stringify. We'll pass in task because that's what we want to return to the browser. And all goes well, let's return status of 200. Else, we'll go return new response. json.stringify. We'll just go with null. And we'll go status of 500. Okay. Ooh, where did this error come from? All right. So this is going to take care of the get task by ID. Now we'll need a way to update our task. So we'll use a put request for it. So we'll go export async function put, and we'll go rec and ctx. And we'll start with our database connection, db.connect. And we might as well just copy this from here. And let's add in a try catch block. And we're going to need this again, so I might as well just copy it. Okay. And within the try catch block, let's start by grabbing the data from the body. So we'll go const body await, and we'll go request.json. And underneath it, let's create a variable named update task. And we'll set it equal to await the task model. And we want to find the task by its ID and update it. And we want to be able to update it with the information from the body. So we'll go set, and we want to destructure the body. And outside of it, we're going to set new to true. And this is basically just saying that this is a new, that the information we're getting is new, and that's what we want to use to update the body, or update the task, excuse me. And then once, if all goes well, we'll go return new response, and we'll go JSON.stringify, and we'll pass in updated task, and we'll go with status of 500. I mean, excuse me, 200. This is a good thing, not bad. Well, success, it's not failure. And if it doesn't work out, now we'll do return new response, JSON.stringify. We'll go null, and we'll set the status to 500. It helps if you put that first. Okay. So let's go ahead and test this one out. And I could have just kept it open. We don't need to open that. Let's go to Thunder Client. And we'll go back to where we were. So in order to get an individual task, we do have our get route set up, right? Let me make sure. Yep. So in order to get an individual task, we'll need the ID of that task. So here's the ID. Let's change the endpoint to get API/ID. And if we click send, it's not gonna let me do it. I need to remove. Let's change this to delete. That's what it will be. Okay, and if we go back to Thunder Client, we are getting a error. Okay, so let's go back to API. We'll go delete. Let's just comment this out for right now. Go get, and we get a status of 200, the individual ID. So now let's change this to a put request to make sure that the update is work. So let's go test update, updated, test description, updated, and let's just change the status to closed. Did I put close or close? Let's make sure close with a D, because if it's not accurate, it will throw an error. And we see that it is now updated. And if we go to our database, we see we have our task. In addition to, we see the updated description and title. So now the last endpoint we'll need to create is our, there we go, delete. So we already have the template or the boiler to start the code listed here. So let's create a variable name. Task, and let's set it equal to await task find by ID. And underneath it, let's go await task find by ID and delete. And we can just return new response, JSON.stringify. Delete it. MSG, yep. And then we'll set the status. Actually, I messed up right here. This should be within. That's why I'm getting that error. And then you come outside of it. And sorry about that. We'll just pass in here status 200, and we'll go return new response, JSON.stringify, go null, status 500. Okay, make sure I did didn't mess anything up there. Okay, so now if we go back to this API endpoint and we go to delete, it says deleted. And if we go to database, we see we have nothing there. Okay, so the last endpoint we want to set up with our application is going to be to display the actual stats of our, or the data, or the stats within our MongoDB cluster. So let's go back to we can close these out. So let's go back to our API directory, and within the stats folder, let's click on the file name route.js. And within this will hold the endpoints to capture the data of our stats. So first we'll start by importing our DB. And we'll also import user. That way we can see how many users we have. It should just be a personal task manager, but if you want a family member to use it, you'll have the ability to see how many users are signed up. And we'll also bring in the task models. And here we'll go export, and this is going to be a GET request, async function GET. And then we'll pass in a request. So first, we'll always start with a connection to our DB. And we'll add a try catch block. And we'll start with, user count will be equal to await user.count documents. And next we'll need is a way to capture the total task. Total task count is equal to await task.count documents. Now we'll need a way to capture the open task. Open task count is equal to await task.count docs. Okay. Next, we want the closed, or do we call it close or complete? I can never remember what I call close. But I think it's called, we'll just call it complete. Close task count is equal to await task dot count docs. And we'll need to pass in the names in just a second, but I'm just going to go ahead and create these first. And we'll need to the last one to be progress. So we'll call it progress task count is equal to await task.count documents. And here we'll need to create a variable that stores everything. So we'll call it stats is equal to all of the variables that we just created. So user count, total task count, open task count, close task count, progress task count. And we'll go return TRN new response JSON.stringify stats. And we'll set the status to 200 if all goes well. And if we get an error, we'll go return new response JSON.stringify null status 500. So within each of these, what we want to, not each of these, but what we want to pass in for our statuses, we want to pass in a status. We want to pass in the status so that it knows what to look for and what to capture. So we'll go status, SATUS of open. And let's make sure we change this to capital O. STATUS, yep. And here we can just copy this. We'll go status of close. And we'll go status of progress. And it'll help if you put this in parentheses. That's why it's giving us that error. I mean in brackets, excuse me. Sorry about that. And here, let's do the same. Okay. Now let's go back to good old Thunder client and test this out. PI task. And we won't see anything except for a user at this point because status of 200. Okay, so it looks good. So now what we can do is with this cared for, we can go ahead and work on displaying this data on our front end, and we'll go ahead and work on that next. right, so now let's focus on setting up our front end, and we're going to need a few dependencies in order to complete our application. So first, we're going to go npm I, and I think we've already installed it. I could check, but we're going to install Axios. We're going to use Daisy UI. So let's Daisy UI, and let's go with install. And Daisy UI, okay. And I also want to use the a different editor versus the normal standard editor, and I think we're going to use one from React. I'm trying to think of the name of it. It is simple IMD editor. The React editor. Where's this thing at? I think it should be EasyMD npm. Yeah, that's it. And hold on, let me expand this out. No, this isn't it. It is simple MD editor. I think this is it. Yep. And we may add in toast notifications later, but I think for right now, this should be enough to get us going. If we need anything else, we'll always come back. Icons, duh. Let's install those now as well, because I like to have a few icons. npm I, React icons. All right, we're clear. Terminal still going. Okay, cool. So first, I know we'll need the plugin for Daisy UI. Let's just go here. What's the tailwind? And you can remove this. I'm not using the background image, but if you want, keep it if you like. And let's save our file. In this file, we're going to start by bringing in the use client, and we'll go RFCE, task list, and actually let's just change this from a div to a section, task list, and let's go back to we have it in the task page right here, and I want to add it under task underneath that div. And we see we have it listed there. Perfect. All right. So now within the task list, let's bring in some imports. Let's bring in use effect and use state. This is going to help us manage the state of the file for our task list. And we'll bring in use state there. We'll also need link because we want to have the ability to click on a task and it redirect to the individual task page. So we'll go import link. We'll also need Axios. So within the task list function, let's start by grabbing our task, and we'll go set task, and this is going to be equal to use state, and we want to pass this in an empty array because this is going to store all. And I also want the ability to filter because we aren't going to do it. We could have done this client or server side, excuse me, but because we're not, I'm going to set it up to filter client side. So we'll go filter and we'll go set filter. And we're going to use state, of course, state. And we'll start with a all, because we want the filter state to start with all tasks to be displayed first. Obviously, once you click on it, you could change it, but this will work for right now. So first, let's create a function to fetch all tasks. So we'll go const fetch task, not each, fetch, F-E-T-C-H, task. And we'll make this an asynchronous function. And we'll go try catch block. And within it, we want to start by grabbing the response. So we'll go const response is equal to await Axios dot get, because this is a get request, and we're going to get the items from /API/task, because that is the endpoint we created. And then we want to set the task. We want to pass these tasks into this array. So we'll go response.data. And if we get an error, we'll just console.log error getting task. Let's got that plural. And let's just pass in the error there. And next, we would want to fetch the task, and we want to store them within the array. So next, we'll want to use use effect here. And we'll go here, and we'll go fetch task, calling this function listed here within use effect. And we'll want to store those inside of a empty array. And with that, let's go ahead and make sure that we can, let's just go ahead and create the filter function as well. So we'll go const handle filtered change, and we'll listen out for the event, and we'll go set filter e.target.value. All right. And then let's create a variable that will actually handle the filtering and what it should look like. So we'll go with filtered, filtered task. So I guess it, and we'll go filter if it equals all. Then we want to show task, or we want to say task dot filter, and we want for each task we want to go task dot status is equal to filter. And yeah, I know I have an error right here. And we'll say task. Let me see. Task dot filter. Task dot filter. Task is. This should be an arrow. Yup. Task is equal to the status. Yup. Filter equal all. Or task filter task status. Okay, perfect. All right, this should care for us. So now within the return statement, let's start by giving our section a class name of padding the X and Y. And we'll go H2. Well, before I set those up, let's just make sure this is working first. So let me go with a table, and we'll give it a class name of width full border collapse. And within it, we'll need a T head for the table head. And we'll need a TR for as a table row. And the first row, so this initial row is going to have the headers for our table. So we'll go table head, class name of border gray. And I'm just going to set it to 300. This is just for styling, so feel free to set yours to whatever you like. And call this one title. Okay. And we'll list those there. And this will go title, description, DESCR, yeah, that's it. And then status. Okay. And that will conclude the table head. Now underneath, let's add a table body. And let's go with filtered task dot map. Actually, you know what? Yeah, I'm going to need to do this first. Filtered task dot map. How did I spell this? Let's just grab it from here. Okay. Filtered task dot map. So we want to map over each, and we want to set the name to task. And for each task, we want to create a table row that displays the data, that displays the title, the description, and the status. So we don't have anything in our database currently. So let's go TR for table row, and we'll close that there, and we'll set the key to task dot underscore, ID. That way React isn't upset with us. And then for the table data, let's just pass in task dot title. And let me create a task really quick so that we can see. Sorry about that. Here, and go back there. And API task, let's go post, and we can just delete this. And let's change this to open. Just create it there. And we see we have the test, which is here. Okay, so it is displaying the data on our page, so that is working properly. Perfect. So let's just go ahead and clean this up a little bit, style it, and get it looking as we want. So we'll go class name, border, and we'll go border gray and set it at 300. And right here, I'll add in another one for the description. I think DSC. Yep. And we'll add in another one for the status. Okay. And I think we can go text center. Yeah, let's go text center so it's not to the left. Okay. All right. And grab that. Ooh. Don't yell at us. Oh, okay. I see why, because I have an extra. There we go. All right. There we go. So now it is displaying the data from the database. So I think we will add one more status. You know what? Instead of showing the description, I think what we'll do is we'll just show the title, the status, and update. So let's go status. Let's go update right here. That way we'll have a link to the individual page. So let's go status. And then right here, we can keep the table data, and let's just change this from it to a link. And clean that formatting up a little bit. So within this link, what we want is if we click on the update, let me just add update so we can see it. Update. If we click on update, what we want, it needs a href. What we want is the ability to go to the individual task page, the same way we did when we created the API endpoint. So that endpoint for this, it actually won't be those. It'll be the backticks / task / task. And the $, and we'll go task dot underscore ID. And if we save that, all right, and we don't have this page created just yet, but we can add it really quickly. So we'll just go back to task, we'll go to ID, and then we'll go to page.js. And we'll just add something so that we can have something on the screen to make sure it's working. Use client RFCE. Let's see. We'll call this single task. And we'll go section single. Let's just see if it routes to this page. And we were in task list, yeah. Okay, so we see it is routing to the individual task page. So we'll come back and make sure that it's passing in that individual data. But for right now, let's just add in a little bit of styling there. We don't need much. So we'll go back to task. And actually, you know what? We look at it, it's actually okay. Maybe add a little bit of padding, but it's fine. And I'll do that. There we go. Okay, so we now have the ability to display all tasks. Next, we want to add in we want to add the new task form. We want to add our stats, and we also want to add some filtering right here so that we can filter the task by the status. So we'll work on that next.